Awesome.
Hello, welcome everyone. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our third installment of our SEO Bytes micro webinar series. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Jesse Hollett, and I'll be your moderator today. I am in marketing operations at Lionbridge. And in this session, we're going to be focused on helping you reach new markets in the SERP by giving you a blueprint utilizing best practices in domain and URL structure, hreflang and xdefault usage, and content localization, as well as a couple stories to kind of wrap up everything and kind of get everything easy to kind of understand. And with of course the overall purpose being to just completely dominate global search results for your company, which would just be great. So before we get started though, a quick housekeeping note. The session is available in 9 languages via AI generated live translations. So feel free to choose whichever language that best suits you. It's a pretty cool feature. So feel free to check that out, play with that. We've set aside 30 minutes for the webinar today. And we'll have an open-ended Q&A session at the end. So be sure to type away any kind of questions that you want at any time. Feel free to test it out. Say howdy if you're in the South, or any other greeting if that you prefer. So while many of you are here because you're either a Lionbridge partner or already a customer of ours, or you've actually attended one of our SEO webinars before, I want to take a moment just to quickly introduce ourselves to anybody who may be new. Lionbridge has been a global leader in translation and localization for over 25 years, which is a super long time for translation companies. We help companies connect with audiences in over 350 languages, actually. Lionbridge is also at the forefront of global SEO services, helping customers create and localize multilingual content for target markets. And today, I'm super excited about this. We're actually joined by 2 of the smartest people I know. Super excited about that. We're joined by Brendan Walsh, who is Lionbridge's SEO subject matter expert, and Chris Burkholm, who is the Senior Director of Demand at Astound Digital. So please, everyone, welcome me in joining them. And I want to start with Chris for an actual introduction and not just like a quick brief one. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your background as well as your agency?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Pleasure to be here. So Chris Burkholm, as Jesse said, Senior Director of Demand at Astound Digital. I've been in this space for, wow, it's coming on nearly 20 years. I got my start in the aughts at MTV Networks. I moved over to Omniture for a while. I came back to Minnesota during the Adobe acquisition and worked for an e-commerce company in kind of an in-house agency. And there I helped them start and grow their SEO program and develop that over roughly 11 years until about 2021. Our agency was acquired by Astound Digital. And at Astound, we're helping them grow their performance marketing capabilities. Astound Digital, if you're not familiar, is a systems integrator, one of the premier Salesforce partners. We focus on integrating the full end-to-end shopping experience for businesses with an expertise in the off-site demand generation channels like paid media, affiliate, email, as well as the content side. So consider SEO, testing, analytics. And then we also have a strong focus on the customer data integration and activation, just making sure that our clients get the most out of their media investments. So really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks so much for that, Chris. Yeah, Astound Digital is a great agency, so I'm super happy to have you here. Brendan, could you tell us a little bit about you as well? Because I think you've got a similarly long, is it like resume or is it rap sheet?
I don't think I need to be quite as thorough. People have heard of me before and probably been on previous calls. I'm the SEO subject matter expert for Lionbridge. I work with global international clients. I look at so many solutions every year that I suppose hreflang is second nature to me. Global SEO is second nature to me at this stage. So it's just looking forward to try and pass on some of that knowledge.
Yeah, and Brendan, global SEO is pretty much all you do now here, right? Like that's
Yeah.
you're just You look at global companies,
Okay.
you help them figure it out, right?
Yeah. 10 years solid of, just pure global SEO, mainly around the technical side of things, but also like significantly around content optimization and making sure that, in-market content or content for a particular market is reviewed and created by, in-market resources, optimized by in-market resources with the right tools and all that kind of thing. So it's been an interesting journey, the last 10 years with Lionbridge. Prior to that, I focused mainly on local SEO, but 10 years now solid on global. It's been an interesting journey and with some really interesting clients.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get into it. I wanted to, I think, start with, you think about icebreaker questions. I think that this one might be a little bit loaded. And so Chris, I'm going to ask it to you first, but let's say you were going to create a global website today. What kind of structure are you going to go with? Because I think we're going to talk about architecture first. Would you rather use a global TLD or would you rather use a CCTLD structure?
Honestly, I think it very much depends on the business needs and how they're set up, how they're integrated with the marketing teams. I think it also depends on how many sites and how many countries you're operating in to begin with. There's unique aspects and benefits to utilizing a CCTLD, but I think if you're in a pretty large number of locales with a large number of languages, utilizing a GTLD is probably the most beneficial, and then breaking out your language locales into directory structures. Now, that's not the only way you can do it, and at times there's definitely a need to utilize a CCTLD. I think we'll talk about it maybe a little bit later, but if you're doing business in China, having the CCTLD there is definitely beneficial. Yeah, I think it's very much just dependent on your business or client needs.
Gotcha. Yeah, Brendan, what do you think about that?
Well, I totally agree. If I was starting out with a greenfield site and just, tomorrow, let's build a global presence for a company, I would definitely start with a global TLD and with regional content and directory structures. Href, once you've got a solid Href Lang solution, it kind of emulates having CCTLDs. Do you know what I mean? Because you're telling Google directly this page is for this market, which is essentially what a CCTLD does. So I think a global TLD with a strong Href Lang solution that describes the relationships between the pages is, the ideal scenario. But we never really live in an ideal world, so it depends. If a company starts off in the UK, they're highly likely to have a .co.uk, and then if they want to go global, they're highly likely then to have a .com for their other markets or something similar. Or maybe if they decide to go to one other market, they might try another CCTLD like .de for Germany or something like that. But you will find that based on how a company grows, they will have quirks to how they're structured, the URLs that they're using, the domains they're using. So you need to accommodate that. You need to make sure that the example I gave was, if it's a UK company that's going global, well, you just need to accommodate that .co.uk into your Href Lang solution and make sure that Google is aware, or all your kind of search engines are aware of the relationship between the CCTLD pages and the global TLD pages. And if you have that in place, then you're on a winner. There is no issues. But I think the ideal scenario is a nice, clean global TLD with.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Brendan, too, in a greenfield situation, right? Starting from scratch, GTLD, best way to go forward.
Nice.
But nothing is perfect, and a lot of organizations already have multiple CCTLDs. So I think the best foot forward, and we were talking about this earlier, you always have to start with an Href Lang implementation of the situation you're in right now, if you have those multiple CCTLDs, and you can work your way to migrating over to a GTLD at a later point. And in fact, utilizing a directory structure, depending on where you operate, but in parts of Europe, think Belgium, think Switzerland, where you have multiple language spoken, you're probably already using some sort of directory structure from a language perspective anyway for the ccTLD, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Belgium and Switzerland, Canada, all of these countries, where you do have to kind of consider language within whether it's a global TLD or a ccTLD. But yeah,
Now,
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Brennan.
So I think the other scenario that you'll find, well, I find anyway, Chris, I'm not sure about you, but is when companies, merge, where you've got like an M&A or whatever, and suddenly you have to accommodate, multiple TLDs, multiple global TLDs, multiple ccTLDs. So situations evolve. And I think the main thing is, to sit down and kind of look at all the assets that you have and make sure that the relationship between those assets is understood by the search engine, which, again, we're back down to a good implementation of hreflang.
Yeah, and that's where the pivot is, right? How well can you implement the hreflang? Are you dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and ensuring that you're making the most references possible to ensure everything is indexed properly?
So
and I think, yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Brennan.
I was going to say that's a good point, Chris make. I mean, if you've a global site and you're having indexing issues, so if you're finding that your English content for whatever the Irish market or your English content for the Australian market isn't getting indexed, that's highly likely to be an issue with your hreflang solution.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? It's because Google doesn't understand that, this is a version of that page, and now it sees it as a duplicate. So if it sees it as a duplicate, then it's going to ignore it and kind of not index it. So yeah, a good hreflang solution helps with, helping Google to understand the structure of your site and, the relationship between pages, and make sure that all of those pages get indexed.
So, Chris, you had mentioned that there's, if you're on a ccTLD right now, that there may be some path towards migration to a GTLD. Could you talk a little bit about what, if someone was interested in maybe reducing the sort of time that they spend sort of managing, managing having multiple ccTLDs, or is in a position where they sort of have to do that? How can they sort of like maybe take the first step towards kind of going to a GTLD, sort of maybe a more of a combined solution, or kind of migrating completely?
Yeah, so hinting at what I said earlier, the first step is take what you have, map all of your different ccLTs, and then implement an hreflang. So you're referencing all the different variations, and then those variations are referencing yourself. That's first and foremost. That'll help fix any indexation issues you have to start. Once that's done, or in concurrence with that, you can start planning on how you're going to create a GTLD. Take your different pieces of content from all of your regions, map them to a directory structure, and using the ISO standard for language and locale. So if in the US, it would be ENUS, maybe an ESUS. For Canada, it would be an ENCA, maybe an FRCA. But map that content, build that into a directory structure, and then you can implement the hreflang in a couple of different ways. There's doing that in the XML sitemap, and then there's doing that in the head of the HTML. And you just want to ensure that the ENCA version is referencing the FRCA version, and on the FRCA version, it's referencing the ENCA version. If you're in Canada, it might be easy to manage that in the head of each page. But if you're in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different countries, say in Europe and North America and South America, it might be easier to manage that in the XML sitemap. And so there are tools you can use to ensure that once you've kind of drawn up your href lang map and say an XML sitemap, you can go quality check that to make sure you are back referencing every other reference in the sitemap.
Cool. Yeah, Brendan, have you? I would say, how often is that happening with some of the clients that you work with? Are people looking to move to a less sort of admin heavy solution, or are they sort of just?
Well, I think from a significant portion of our clients would be on the GTLD route anyway, you know, like global brands that kind of exist as a global brand and can survive as a global brand because they've got a lot of interest. I think what we're really trying to get at here is we're trying to solve a problem. And that problem is kind of internal competition between pages of the same website or of different websites for the same entity. And I think that's really the main thing to kind of keep in mind as we're going through this is you solve internal competition by telling Google or search engines about every other version of that page. So I've seen it explained technically where, you know, if you've got a hreflang implementation, a solid hreflang implementation, within Google it'll have a single doc ID and then all of these other versions of the page listed underneath it. So what you're trying to get is Google to understand that set of pages as a single entity, whether they're on the same website or not. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether it's global TLDs, CCTLDs, it doesn't matter. Just you need to make sure that Google understands every version of the page and the relationship between them. Once that's done, and that sounds difficult, but it's not really that difficult because you only have to get it right once. Okay, so if you're thinking about your US page and you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, well, here's all the different versions of the US page and the US page itself because you have a self-referencing tag. That's it done. You just need to make sure that those tags are copied over to all of the other versions of that page. They're the exact same tags on every single version of that page. So initially it sounds very, very difficult. You know, this is a complex technical solution. But when I was building my first hreflang sitemap tool, which, you know, generated based on a spreadsheet, and I see there's other tools like that available, it became very obvious that this is just, you know, when I was building it was just a text generation tool. It was very straightforward. You just get it right once, and then every other version of the page and within that, you know, row of data just got the exact same tags, and you move down to then every version of, you know, got the exact same tags. So it is not that difficult. It's just getting your head around. I mean, I suppose when I was starting out with sorry, maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but when I was starting out with hreflang tags initially, I thought there's no way that Google could expect me to put in, you know, if I've got 40 different versions of this page and, you know, it wants, what's that, 40 by 40, that's 1,600 tags to make sure that all of these 40 versions of this page, but that's what they want, okay? Once you get your head around that and you realize, okay, well, I only have to build the 40 tags once and then I can copy them 40 times, you know, that kind of way, it becomes quite, you know, a little easier to get your head around. But yeah, I hope that, I'm not sure if that was useful context or not. Well, but
yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's a lot of work to start, but it's not hard work. Though I will caveat that with some nuance and say that there are some businesses where deciding if a page is a one-to-one match it is actually the fact. Right? You could be a medical device company and you have a product in the States and a product in the UK. And while it might have the same name, there are certain standards, there are certain regulations that create a bit of variance between those products. And at the end of the day, are those two products the same? Are they equivalent enough that you'd want them indexed as the same thing? Now, in a lot of situations, yes, but some situations it might not be the case. And so there is a bit of that art in the mapping process of how alike are two things. But just know if they're very similar, serving the same purpose, there's some slight linguistic nuance, they're probably the same. If there's, fundamental differences, features of a product or complete content elements that are, in one and not in another, then they might be different. And it's worth noting that.
So in the case of like a medical device company, two different SKUs, one being only for one particular market because of regulations, and one being for, let's say, the global market, those would not be the same, right? Is what you're saying?
Yeah, depending on the amount of variance in there, yes. Like if it was a different plug-in adapter, it's the same. If there are inherent, fundamental aspects of the product that are different due to regulation, even though they might be called the same thing, they could be considered different enough that you wouldn't want to, have that hreflang from a US product to a UK product.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. So as we're talking about sort of like mapping this and sort of trying to, identify which version of this is right for which language, Brendan, you were talking about hreflang, and, we're going to talk, a lot about that here in just a minute, actually. But I was wondering first, just to set the stage, and don't get mad at me. I'm just playing devil's advocate. So just don't get mad at me. But didn't Google, I forgot who it was, a Google webmaster come out and say, hreflang isn't that important anymore?
I think the commentary around that kind of said that rather than Gary Iles himself. So
okay.
Gary Iles is one of those kind of guys who comes out and says things about search. There's a few of them, but he mentioned earlier this year that Google would be open to another solution, but nothing more than that really. So I'm glad they're open to another solution. Like ideally, the ideal scenario is that, we don't need hreflang and Google just understands these relationships between pages inherently, but that's not the case. And I'm not even sure, like with the advent of AI, maybe in the future, there will be an ability for, Google to kind of, or all search engines to kind of review all versions of your page and kind of work out the relationships for itself. But in reality, that would be very, processing heavy, So I don't see hreflang going away soon. It may go away, but it won't be going away like in the next couple of years. So it's definitely something we need in the short term, medium term, and I would say quite likely in the long term, because to replace it will require, if it's going to be replaced by some kind of AI tool which will inherently understand the relationships, the amount of processing power involved in doing that, if you think about the web in total, would burn rainforests. So I think hreflang is here for pretty much the future.
100% agree. And unless it's some automated AI way to determine and not make mistakes, whatever methodology they come up with to replace hreflang, the adoption rate is going to take some time anyway, and therefore you're going to have something in the interim, and that's going to be hreflang.
Yeah. And as I said, like once you get it right for one page, all versions of that page get the same tag. So, it comes across as being extremely complex when you're going into it first, but hopefully we demystify some of that a little bit here with these talks. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and we're going to talk about hreflang, in way more depth and XDefault and everything like that here in just a minute. But before we get to that, I wanted to dovetail off of the sort of like domain structure conversation, and I kind of wanted to go into the sort of URL structure conversation, because I know that we'd had conversations in the past about that and everything like that. So I wanted to change the slide real quick, and so everyone can sort of see this. But I'm wondering, Brendan, and I'll go to you to ask this, because I front loaded Chris with the domain question, the very loaded domain question. If it's going to be the same question, it's just going to be to you instead. If you were to start a global website, what kind of URL structure would you use for sort of sorting these these either languages or language locale pages?
Okay, well, I mean, from the slide we can see that there's three options. Okay, there's a directory option, there's a subdomain option, and there's a language parameters option, which we're just not gonna we're gonna try not to talk about too much. But we do need to mention it because it does exist, and it exists on key important sites like Google support. You know what I mean? So if Google has this, HL parameter, equals ENGB or whatever it is, and it's just so annoying because it's the one approach they don't recommend themselves. Okay, so the top two approaches, directories and subdomains, are the two approaches to be used. Subdomains, I'm not sure why you would use subdomains instead of subdirectories, unless you specifically want to kind of these two exist as separate sites. Do you know what I mean? So much like ccTLDs, but maybe you want to host, one part of your sitemap, or one part of your site in Europe, one part in the US, and one part in China. Well, then subdomains might facilitate that a bit more. But in general, directories is the ideal approach. And from a directory structure perspective, we recommend using, ISO standard codes for the directory structure to match the hreflang tags to make things just nice and clean and clear. So if you're in a language level site, have codes at or have your directories at language level, EN, FO, DE. If you are targeting at country and country language level, then you'll need two codes, the language code and the country code. So LLCC, we kind of term that. So you'd have ENGB, ENUS, FOR, etc. And you can apply that also in subdomains. If you decide to go the subdomain route, use those same tags. Just be nice and clean and clear, so that you'll often get country names being used in subdomains. But I think the ISO codes are probably the most appropriate to use when you're creating the directory and subdomain structure. And please stay away from language parameters. Google gets away with it because it's Google. That's it. I've seen it implemented. Apart from Google, I've seen it implemented twice. And I've only seen problems where, as you move from page to page, the language parameter gets dropped and you get multiple pages trying to get indexed on the same, or multiple languages trying to get indexed on the same URL. It's just a nightmare. Okay, that's rant over.
Yeah, I think also when you're looking at, all right, are we going to do language or are we going to do language and locale? It's good to be aware of some of the gotcha moments that you can encounter. Right? If you do just language and it's EN and you're referencing it in the UK and somebody from the US goes and hits the page, currency could look different. Spelling of words can look different. It might be a little bit of a jarring experience, right?
100%. Yeah.
And so it's highly encouraged to be as accurate as possible, as frequent as possible. Save effort where you can, but don't leave anything up to chance in regard to somebody seeing potentially the wrong thing. Other mistakes I've seen are utilizing capitalization for the locale in the directory structure. SEO best practice. Let's avoid any, capitalization of any letters within the URL if possible. And then, Brendan, like you mentioned, following that ISO standard, ENGB, FR, FRCA.
I think one of the things to consider, so, we were talking about country or, language approach, country approach. I think if you're on an e-commerce site, anything to do with, targeting people, at currency level, it needs to be at country level. If you've got an informational site where you're just kind of producing content and, there's no currency, there's no kind of, then language is a reasonable approach. But once you get down to e-commerce, once you get down to kind of anything like that, really, I think country approach and country language approach, so that, you've three different versions, we say, for your Switzerland, two versions for your Belgium, and a couple of versions for your, that definitely works. It's a much more appropriate approach.
Yeah, and I think we've talked very little about it. This has been a super technically focused discussion so far, but getting into the art of it, when you're targeting these language and locales, the linguistic cultural nuance is super important. Understanding how they refer to things in particular regions and making sure you're not just taking a straight translation from Google in regard to, like, I focus on e-commerce a lot. I worked with a client who made printers. We focused heavily on Drucker like 10 years ago, and it turned out Tintenstahl Drucker was actually what the organization should have been focused on. So you can build all the technical stuff correctly, but if you're not taking the content and actually appropriately translating and taking into account cultural and linguistic nuance, you're going to waste a lot of that technical effort by not getting the right content in front of the right users.
And just doing the keywords research, making sure you do the keywords research, do the basics in each language, in each market, because people search differently across, like I've worked on, say, a very technical website, a very global technical website software, and, on their support site, different implementations for the UK and the US, the overlap in keywords, the top 10 keywords on a technical support site, you would think there's going to be huge overlap in keywords. One keyword in the top 10 overlapped between the UK and the US. One keyword overlapped between French France and French Canadian. So, the people just search differently in different regions. Without the research, you're not really going to break that market. Without actually, doing the research and putting in a bit of tailoring of the content, if there's two, if you're writing whatever English content for the UK or whatever it is, take into account the keywords in that market, take into account the nuances in that market, take into account the spellings in that market, all the various different things that you need to do to make sure that people are going to be using text to find your page. They're going to write in a word, 2 words, 3 words, and from that find your page. Those words are going to be local. They're not going to be international words. These are not people who are just going to, oh, today I'll put on my international hat to find this international page. They're going to use local terms in local markets to find local content, or what they think is local content. And what we're trying to produce is content that will work locally.
And, we're speaking to SEO professionals here, or maybe some newer folks into SEO. And you might be thinking, how much can I change? Well, this is SEO, and we need to focus on things like title tags and meta descriptions, right? And taking a straight translation of, say, a title tag or a meta description and moving it to German, it's probably going to get truncated. So you can make changes in things like that between pages and still have them be a one-to-one map in that href lang tag, right? That linguistic nuance can still exist, and they can still be referenced at a one-to-one. This is the other version of this in another language.
100%.
So I think we're getting close to the end of our time. So I want to see if we can shove in a last couple things. So I think what happened was, we've actually addressed pretty much every sort of key point about hreflang. I'm gonna blow up we have a slide on hreflang, which we're going to provide to everyone, of course. But I wanted to kind of cover this a little bit before we run out of time. We got about 15 more minutes left, and we don't have too many questions right now. So I would just want to make sure that that we can cover this. Now, we pretty much covered, and I'm gonna try to review it real quick. That sitemap implementations, where possible, are usually a little bit less maybe effort, but there's no fundamental difference between implementing hreflang in the head versus sitemap, right?
I think intrusive. So I think a sitemap implementation is less intrusive. So if you kind of apply a head solution, then every single page on your website is going to change when you've applied that solution. So, you may want to kind of avoid any testing that might be required for, when you make that level of change to a page, and a sitemap implementation then would work really well. The one thing on this, but I think we've covered a lot of the points from this slide earlier. The one that's on this that I really I come across it quite a lot, is accurately referencing the on-page language with your hreflang tag. So if, for example, you've got a German pages or, a DEDE directory, and 90% of that is German, but new pages maybe go out in English first and then are updated to German, or, some pages are just in English, have not been translated. They should not be DEDE. They must be ENDE, because if you're not accurately reflecting the language of the on-page content, you're lying, okay? You're telling a false, tag to Google. Google will analyze that, see that it's false, and then that might, impact all of the other tags. So it's not just impacting, say, your German page. It could be impacting, all 40 of those pages that are related to this page, because one lie is one lie too many. So that's just one thing to be 100% sure of. Like, if you're pumping out untranslated content into, we say, the German directory, make sure that the on-page language is referenced in the hreflang tag.
100% agree.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we were able to cover most of this right here. I think one thing that we didn't talk too much about is X default. So I'm gonna run to that slide just real quick.
Cool.
Chris, go ahead, Brendan. You're raring to go. Go
ahead. Okay, so there's two things on this. There's X default and language level fallbacks. The first thing to caveat, right, is X default, you only ever apply X default on a complete solution. So if, for example, you're doing a partial solution, or you're not sure your solution is complete, do not apply X default, okay? Because X default will interfere with any of the pages that are not included in the solution. So if you have a partial solution and you use X default, then any page that isn't included in the solution is going to be severely impacted. But the way to think of X default, actually, can we just jump back 2 slides?
This one here?
Yeah, this one here. So I tried to develop this slide as a visual kind of representation of how we work from a tagging perspective to include X default. So in our universe of languages, we've got language level, we've got our LLCCs, we've got ENUS, ENGB, okay? But we wrap that then in EN, okay? So you've got ENGB, all UK users are going to get ENGB. You've got ENUS, all US users are going to get ENUS. But then you've got EN. So me as an Irish user, an Australian user, whatever, they can all be directed to a particular page, okay? Now what that means is in those markets, ENGB and ENUS pages are not competing with one another, because you're very clearly telling Google, take one of these options or take neither of these options and use this other option. In this solution, or in this diagram, you can see that F4 is a global implementation. So there's only one F4 page, and it's to apply to all F4 pages globally. In this solution, we've got a German page and then a German fallback page. So that German fallback page will cover Switzerland and Austria and that kind of thing. And then we've got Spanish, where you've got ESUS, ESMX, ESES. So you've got separate pages for each of those. And then you may have, a global Spanish page. But then once your user does not fall into any of those rule sets, and we've gone through all those rules, then it's X default. So that X default can be pointing to a global English page. It can be pointed to a very specific page. It can be pointing to one of the existing pages. But what it does is it makes sure that Google knows, for anyone who's not covered by this set of rules, send them to this page. And if you don't have X default, then what you could have is you could have, multiple English pages competing, or you could have multiple, you could have French and German page competing, we say, for a Swiss user, or, you could have, whatever. So the X default is critical in, defining that single version of the truth for any user who's not included in your current rule set.
Yeah, and I would add to that, just from a commerce perspective, if your site is doing commerce, be very, very careful of the catch-alls. In this particular instance, if you had an Irish user in English catch the EN, if it goes to ENUS, the currency is going to show up as $signs. If it goes to 100%. ENGB, it's going to show up as the pound. They're not going to see the right currency. And so you would have to ensure that you're actually showing them the right thing.
what I find, actually, one of the things I can bring to the table here is, like, I find with some of our clients who, very specifically, we say would be marketing, we say, to the US and to the UK, and they don't want to market to people outside of the US and the UK. You might get a global English page where everyone else is sent to, and this is not an e-commerce page. This is just kind of a catalog type page. You sometimes see that kind of approach. Not often, because people generally want to sell when they can sell. But if very specifically you can only deliver to certain markets, then you'll sometimes get that kind of catch-all page, which kind of says, actually, we're not covering your market, but here's a nice bit of bump about that product.
Yep.
Very cool.
Okay.
Chris, I got a question via email actually before the webinar. They were wondering, and I'm not reading it off, I'm just sort of paraphrasing right now. I think it kind of dovetails nicely. Is it possible, or is it recommended, to redirect a user via IP to what you think their preferred language would be?
So the geo IP redirect. No, I mean, is it possible? Sure, it's been done for years. Is it recommended? Absolutely not. A couple of reasons. First, Google often is going to crawl from the US. So let's say you do business in Europe, and Google goes and hits your French site, sees the IP address coming from the US, redirects it back to the US. You're going to encounter some indexation problems. I've even seen it happen with some places in the US, looking at regulations that happen in California and showing from an e-commerce perspective different products that are available in California only, or they only want to sell to people coming from California. And so Google comes from California, only sees those products and ignores the wider catalog. Not recommended to do that. Also, in the EU, it is illegal to detect someone's IP address in a country that's a member state of the EU and automatically redirect them based on their IP address. Now, can you detect their IP address and pop an overlay and say, hey, it looks like you're in Germany and you're at our Italian site. Would you like to go see the German site? And if the user okays that, it is absolutely fine to then redirect them. But for a myriad of reasons, do not implement geo-IP redirection at an automatic function. It will come back to bite you.
And can I just say, as a user, never mind as an SEO person, but as a user, it's incredibly frustrating. So I would often, log on to a UK site to purchase something for my, son who lives in the UK. I don't want to be redirected. I want to buy that in the UK, but just deliver it in the UK, all that kind of thing. So it's not a good idea. I mean, for all kinds of reasons, you'd think it's going to be convenient, but in reality, it's not a good user experience, and it's definitely not a good SEO approach.
Wow, okay. Good stuff. Well, I mean, we've got about 2 minutes left. I wanted to open this up for Q&A. It's been open the whole time. But are there any other questions that anybody has? I know we covered a ton of ground. So I'm sure everyone's head is swimming. But do we have any questions from the audience sort of before we wrap up? It doesn't look like it so far. So generally, also what happens is we'll get some questions a few days later as people start to kind of munch on it and sort of think it over. So if you guys have any questions, we do have an email set up to answer those questions specifically. It is SEO@linebridge.com. Oh, here we go. Actually, literally just got a question in. Let's see. So just to make sure I understand, would I write fresh pages for the different languages with keyword research? It's a great question.
Not necessarily new pages, but you need to refresh the translated pages. So for example, with our standard optimization process, we do the keyword research. You might get 5 or 6 keywords for a page. We use that to rewrite the metadata. So we'll always write fresh metadata. And then, in a standard process, we'll inject keywords into the content or incorporate keywords into the content, particularly, into the, the H1 for the primary keyword, and, using the secondary keywords subtly throughout the content. But it doesn't necessarily need to be fresh, but there are circumstances where it does need to be fresh. Okay, so I think we might have alluded to it earlier, but like legal. So if, for example, you're writing blogs with, a legal slant, well, the legal is going to be different in different markets. Or if it's to do with something like tax or expenses or that kind of thing, well, that's going to be very different in each kind of tax region, each tax environment, each country. So I think it depends on the content, but for some types of content, you definitely need fresh content. But for a lot of content, really, keyword research and applying the local keywords to the translated content is sufficient.
Yeah, and I don't want to dox her name, but the person that asked, just to feel free to pop another question in if that was sufficient. But it sounds like keyword research and sort of optimizing the content by language, should be enough, and you shouldn't have to necessarily rewrite it. Oh, she said thank you. Okay, perfect, great. Yeah, so that was sufficient. So you shouldn't necessarily have to rewrite it each time. We've got another question too. Brendan, you want to read that one?
Yeah, just to clarify, while hreflang is best practice, is it really needed for CCTLDs? It can be a real pain to keep up across sites. I totally agree. It is a real pain to keep up. But, and CCTLDs, maybe not, okay? So if, for example, you have a CCTLD for France and a CCTLD for Germany, it's highly unlikely that they're going to interfere with one another, that you're going to have internal competition between those sites. But if you've got, we'll say, a UK site and you're marketing to the US with a .com site, then you definitely need hreflang. Okay, so, but if you're a European brand with 2 or 3 CCTLDs, particularly for different languages as well as different markets, then you will get away without hreflang. But once you start to think of kind of, okay, well, could these results kind of interfere with one another? If you've got one site on a global TLD and your other site's on a CCTLD, you definitely need hreflang. Examples, even like, US site, with a branded search in a local market. The US site has a right to rank because it's a global site if it's on a .com. So that's just, ideally, hreflang should be implemented. It's not always necessary on CCTLDs.
Hey, Brendan, what about the example of Switzerland? Multiple languages, one CCTLD. Implement the hreflang?
I've seen it implemented, and I've seen it got away without being implemented. But I think, again, it's on branded queries. If you want a single version of your page to be visible for a branded query, then I think you do need hreflang. Because, I mean, even if you think about it, you've got 3 versions of a site for Switzerland. And we'll say you've got a brand called XYZ. Well, if you do a search for XYZ, how does Google know which version of the page to show?
Exactly.
Okay, it's got your language preferences, but, that's not always going to determine, the search results. So I think it's safest to have X default if possible. But again, if you're just France and Germany, 2 CCTLDs, you'll get away without it.
Awesome. Yeah, great questions, everyone.
So
I think we're over our time just a little bit, which is typical for these. If anyone has any questions, again, SEO@lionbridge.com. It was really great sharing this time with you. Thank you all for all your good questions. And for the people who watched the recording, thank you for also emailing questions ahead of time and after. So appreciate y'all. We'll make sure all those questions get answered. I want to thank all of our speakers. Chris, thanks so much for being here. It was really nice talking with you. Really nice having you. And Brennan, thank you so much for the time.
Jesse, thanks for introducing Chris and bringing him to the table here. It's been a really interesting discussion. Really nice to have somebody external, contributing.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Do you want to give out your email address there, or?
Yeah, if you have any questions for me, C. Birkholm, last name is spelled BIRKHOLM, at astounddigital.com.
Okay, and ours is just SEO@lionbridge.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's
Cool.
us.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. Brendan, Jesse,
Thanks, Chris.
thank you so much for having me. I'll sit and talk technical and non-technical SEO with you folks any day.
Nice one. Nice one. Thanks for your
Awesome.
time.
That's been fun. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Take care.